And I don't think that you can't put one of our greatest African American men on trial like that without putting a lot of other people that are very suspect and guilty as well.
Well, I think you still have, he still has audience. I mean, to me, this is one thing I heard somebody say. It was like, God never stopped making people.
We had no idea what Joe Torry was hiding behind his comedy career until he walked arm in arm with Bill Cosby into that Pennsylvania courthouse and called him one of our greatest African American men.
I wanted to go to a lot of trials, Michael Jackson, O.J. Simpson, all this stuff. So when I was asked to go to the Bill Cosby, I wanted to come sit into a trial. I was like, oh, hell yeah, I want to see how this is done.
His own brother, Guy, exposed how Joe was betraying everything their mother taught them over a convicted criminal he didn't even know well.
He was doing that. He wouldn't even know Bill Cosby. It's like, dude, you don't even know Bill. Bill was the comedian that came out when Def Comedy Jam first came out and said that we're despicable and that's not real comedy and whatever. And now you arm in arm with this dude.
Even when Bill Cosby warned Joe that the industry would come after him for supporting him, Joe refused to back down.
He said, hey, look, don't get yourself involved with my stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's on me. It's all on me.
So let's get into it. September 28th, 1965, St. Louis, Missouri. Joe Torry entered the world as one of 6 children to a military family that would soon scatter across the country. His father, a Vietnam veteran struggling with PTSD, created tension that eventually drove their mother to pack up the kids and move to New York, then back to St. Louis, where Joe would discover his gift. At Lincoln University, Joe earned his degree in mass communications and broadcast journalism, while perfecting the comedic timing that would make him famous. He studied legends like Abbott and Costello, Dick Van Dyke, and his idol, Sammy Davis Jr., learning not just how to be funny, but how to command a stage. By 1992, Joe had become the host of HBO's Def Comedy Jam, the most influential comedy platform in America. Every Thursday night, millions tuned in to watch him introduce the next generation of black comedians. Steve Harvey, Bernie Mac, Cedric the Entertainer, they all passed through Joe's stage on their way to stardom.
Is there anything?
No, Bill Cosby is like one of my idols. Just like Dick Gregory, Lyndon Bruce, George Carlin, one of the famous comedians that done it all, and that's how you do it. You know what I'm saying? If you want to, he's the highest. Who's done it like Bill Cosby?
Joe had studied comedy legends his entire life, but Bill Cosby held special significance. Years later, when asked about attending Cosby's trial, Joe would describe Cosby as one of his idols, the pinnacle of what a comedian could achieve. This admiration would soon drive him to make the most controversial decision of his career. Hollywood opened its doors to Joe. He landed his breakthrough film role in John Singleton's Poetic Justice alongside Janet Jackson and Tupac Shakur in 1993. More roles followed: Strictly Business with Halle Berry, Tales from the Hood, House Party 3 with Martin Lawrence. Television welcomed him with guest spots on NYPD Blue, ER, and NCIS. Joe married Crystal in 2001, started a family, and launched the Giving Back the Love Foundation in 1996, which would eventually mentor over 30,000 children and families. He seemed to have it all: success, stability, and respect throughout the entertainment industry. But beneath the surface, Joe carried loyalties and beliefs that would eventually consume everything he'd built. In 1996, he'd joined Omega Psi Phi fraternity, creating bonds that ran deeper than business relationships. One of those bonds was with a comedy legend who'd shaped his career from afar. By 2014, when whispers about Bill Cosby began turning into accusations, Joe Torry faced his first test. Most of Hollywood distanced themselves immediately. Joe did something different. He started watching, listening, and preparing for a decision that would change his life forever.
My thing is for everybody at this point to try to, reach some type of point of healing, to a point where, they're relieved, and it seems like.
When the scandal first broke, Joe's initial public statements focused on healing and relief for all parties involved. But these measured words would soon give way to much more controversial positions that would shock the entertainment world. The man who had spent decades making people laugh was about to make them very uncomfortable. And unlike his comedy routines, this performance would have no punchline, only consequences that would ripple through his family, his career, and his legacy for years to come. The call came in early 2017. Bill Cosby's legal team was preparing for his first criminal trial, and they needed supporters who would stand with him publicly. Most celebrities had already fled, leaving a small circle of the truly committed, or truly naive. Joe Torry said yes.
I wanted to go to a lot of trials, Michael Jackson, O.J. Simpson, all this stuff. So when I was asked to go to the Bill Cosby, I wanted to come sit into a trial. I was like, oh, hell yeah, I want to see how this...
Joe told people it was curiosity about the legal system. He claimed he wanted to learn how trials worked, to understand the process for himself. But when the first photos emerged from the Montgomery County Courthouse in Pennsylvania, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't academic interest, this was active support. June 8, 2017. Joe Torry walked arm in arm with Bill Cosby into the courthouse, helping guide the legally blind comedian through a gauntlet of photographers and protesters. The images went viral immediately. While other celebrities sent thoughts and prayers from a distance, Joe was physically present, literally holding up a man most of America now despised. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Social media exploded with accusations that Joe was being paid to appear in court. Industry insiders questioned his judgment. The man who had once been beloved as the face of Def Comedy Jam was now being called a sellout and worse.
I went back to the house after that. We chopped it up. I saw the whole estate first time there. I saw where the account probably could have happened, where it should have happened.
After court sessions, Joe wasn't just going home. He was going to Bill Cosby's house, talking with him about the case and examining the actual location where prosecutors claimed the assault had taken place. This wasn't passive observation. Joe was conducting his own investigation into the allegations. After court sessions, he went to Cosby's house, examining the location where the alleged assault took place. He was conducting his own investigation, trying to understand what had really happened in that suburban Philadelphia home in 2004. The conversations between Joe and Cosby during this period revealed a relationship deeper than most people understood. Cosby was exhausted by the proceedings, going to sleep at 6:30 or 7 o'clock each night. But before retiring, he pulled Joe aside for conversations that no one else would ever hear.
He said, hey, look, don't get yourself involved with my stuff. You know what I'm saying? It's on me. It's all on me.
Cosby was giving Joe an out, taking full responsibility for the consequences of continued support. But Joe didn't take it. When the first trial ended in a mistrial, Joe could have quietly disappeared. Instead, he prepared for round 2. The retrial in 2018 would test every relationship Joe had built in his 30-year career. His marriage was under strain. His industry contacts were vanishing. And his own family was about to turn against him in the most public way possible. But Joe Torry had made his choice. Whatever the cost, he was seeing this through to the end. Guy Torry was watching the news in his Los Angeles home when he saw his older brother walking into a Pennsylvania courthouse with Bill Cosby. The younger Torry brother, creator of the influential Fat Tuesdays comedy showcase, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Torry brothers had always been competitive. Joe was born in 1965, Guy in 1967. Both had followed the same path from St. Louis to Los Angeles. Both had pursued comedy and acting. But where Joe had opened doors, Guy had kicked them down, creating his own opportunities and building his own reputation. Guy had moved to Los Angeles in 1992, originally to finish his marketing degree. But seeing his brother's success on Def Comedy Jam inspired him to try comedy himself. Within 2 years, he'd landed his own spot on the show. Soon, he was touring nationally and booking film roles in Pearl Harbor, American History X, and Runaway Jury.
I absolutely think my rise and me starting to work more towards success was an issue too, because he was big bro. He had started the game first, and then, you know, I started to work.
By 2017, Guy had arguably achieved more mainstream success than Joe. His creation of Fat Tuesdays had launched careers and influenced a generation of comedians. He'd transitioned successfully from stand-up to acting to producing. The little brother was no longer living in Joe's shadow. The family conflict became public when a radio host revealed what had happened behind the scenes. The host disclosed that Joe had appeared on his show and became so enraged when questioned about his Cosby support that Joe threatened physical violence.
Okay, so Joe came on the show, and he got mad at me.
I was listening.
And threatened to come down here and whoop my behind.
Everybody on the Shield.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was gonna whoop time.
But you know how legends fight legends.
Guy's most devastating attack came when he exposed what he saw as Joe's hypocrisy. During Def Comedy Jam's early years, Bill Cosby had publicly criticized the show, calling the raw urban comedy style despicable and illegitimate. Now, Joe, who had been the face of that show, was publicly supporting the man who had dismissed their entire movement.
He was doing that. He wouldn't even know Bill Cosby. It's like, dude, you don't even know Bill. Bill was the comedian that came out when Def Comedy Jam first came out and said that we're despicable and that's not real comedy and whatever. And now you arm in arm with this.
The family dynamics were falling apart. Their mother, who had taught for 40 years and built the Torry name as synonymous with education and community service, found herself caught between her two most successful sons. She was a prayer warrior, as Guy described her, but even her prayers couldn't bridge the gap that was opening between her children. Joe's response to Guy's public attacks revealed how deeply the family schism had cut. He started calling Guy a narcissist in interviews, suggesting that his brother's opposition was rooted in jealousy and attention-seeking rather than genuine moral concerns.
Whatever he's going through, that's in his head. It's not in my head. And because I won't accept what's in his head, I'm a narcissist.
By 2018, the Torry family was at war with itself. The brothers who had once supported each other's careers were now using their platforms to attack each other. The man who had mentored Guy's entry into Hollywood was being publicly challenged by the brother he'd helped create. The cost was mounting for both of them, but Joe was paying the higher price. His Cosby support had already damaged his industry relationships. Now, his own family was abandoning him too. September 25th, 2018. Bill Cosby was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in state prison. Joe Torry watched from the courtroom as the man he'd supported was led away in handcuffs, 81 years old, and facing the end of his life behind bars. Most supporters would have quietly retreated at this point. The guilty verdict was final, the sentence was harsh, and public opinion had thoroughly condemned anyone who'd stood with Cosby. But Joe Torry wasn't done fighting.
It's going to happen, and if this is the path for justice to be seen, then make it be seen for everybody of all color and everybody that's been accused of something that has high power that could have taken advantage.
Joe's statement to the media outside the courthouse became the most controversial moment of his entire campaign. He wasn't just defending Cosby anymore. He was challenging the entire system of justice, demanding that other powerful men face the same scrutiny for decades-old accusations. The comment destroyed any remaining goodwill Joe had in Hollywood. While some agreed with his logic about equal justice, the context made it appear as if he was minimizing SA rather than critiquing selective prosecution. Entertainment industry executives who had tolerated his Cosby support now considered him completely toxic. TMZ caught Joe at the airport after the sentencing, and his comments about other people going down for mistakes they made 100 years ago went viral for all the wrong reasons. The phrase mistakes to describe SA allegations sparked outrage across social media platforms. Behind the scenes, Joe's personal life was collapsing. His marriage to Crystal, which had survived 17 years of Hollywood pressures, was straining under the weight of his choices. Friends stopped calling. Industry contacts stopped returning messages. The man who had once commanded respect throughout entertainment was now persona non grata. But Joe had one more card to play. In interviews, he started naming specific powerful men who had faced accusations without criminal consequences. He mentioned Donald Trump, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and others, suggesting that racial bias was determining who faced prosecution and who escaped consequences.
I don't think that you can't put one of our greatest African American men on trial like that without putting a lot of other people that are very suspect and guilty as well.
The phrase, "one of our greatest African American men," became the soundbite that defined Joe's position for his critics. They accused him of prioritizing racial solidarity over justice for victims. The nuance of his argument about systemic inequalities was lost in the fury of the moment. By the end of 2018, Joe Torry's career was effectively over. Casting directors wouldn't see him. Comedy clubs were hesitant to book him. The television and film roles that had sustained his career for 3 decades had evaporated. At age 53, he was starting over with nothing but his convictions and his willingness to live with the consequences of expressing them. The comedian who had once made millions laugh had chosen to make them think instead, but thinking was apparently much more dangerous than laughing. June 30th, 2021. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Bill Cosby's conviction on a legal technicality related to a prior agreement with prosecutors. Cosby walked free after serving nearly 3 years in prison. Joe Torry could have claimed vindication, could have said, "I told you so," to the critics who had destroyed his career. Instead, he stayed silent. The man who had spoken so passionately in Cosby's defense for 4 years seemed exhausted by the legal victory. Joe was 56 years old, his career in ruins, his family relationships fractured, his reputation destroyed. Even vindication felt hollow when it came at such a devastating personal cost. Guy Torry had continued working throughout the controversy, maintaining his industry relationships and building new projects. His Fat Tuesday story became an Amazon Prime documentary series in 2022, cementing his legacy as a comedy innovator. The brothers' different choices had led to very different outcomes. In a separate interview, Guy had explained his own philosophy about maintaining integrity in Hollywood. He declared that he would never be a slave to any industry and refused to compromise his morals for career advancement.
I'm not going to be a slave to any industry. I'm not going to compromise my integrity or my morals for the...
The irony was painful. Both brothers had chosen integrity over industry acceptance, but their different definitions of integrity had destroyed their relationship. Guy had walked away from roles that demanded too much compromise. Joe had stayed and fought battles that left him completely isolated. Their mother, now in her 80s, continued praying for reconciliation between her sons. The family gatherings that had once been filled with laughter and storytelling were now tense affairs where certain topics couldn't be mentioned and old wounds remained unhealed. Guy would later describe their ongoing conflict in simple terms: 2 alpha males who couldn't back down from their positions. He pointed out that Joe, as the big brother, had never let him forget the hierarchy, and that dynamic had poisoned their ability to resolve their differences about the Cosby case.
we're just, and it's also 2 alpha males. We're 2 alpha males, and he's big bruh, and usually big older siblings don't let you forget that they're the older sibling.
Joe maintained his charitable foundation and continued performing stand-up on smaller stages across the country. His WTF comedy tour played to audiences who sometimes didn't know his history and didn't understand why this talented comedian was working at clubs instead of theaters. The entertainment industry had moved on without him. The Not or Me Too movement had fundamentally changed how society viewed allegations of S.A. Joe's position, which might have found more sympathy in an earlier era, was now completely incompatible with cultural evolution. In rare interviews, Joe expressed no regret about his choices. He maintained that he'd done what he believed was right, regardless of the consequences. But the cost was evident in his smaller venues, his limited opportunities, and his fractured family relationships. When asked about Bill Cosby's future prospects after prison, Joe remained optimistic, saying that Cosby still had an audience because God never stopped making people.
Well, I think you still have, he still has audience. I mean, to me, it's one thing I heard somebody say. It was like, God never stopped making people.
The final chapter of Joe Torry's story remained unwritten. At 58, he was still performing, still mentoring young comedians through programs like Bussin' Guts, still trying to create opportunities for artists who felt excluded from mainstream platforms. But his influence was severely limited by his choices during the Cosby trials. The man who had once commanded HBO stages and Hollywood sets had voluntarily walked into exile, defending principles that most people couldn't understand or accept. Joe Torry had hidden nothing during his 4-year campaign. His support for Cosby was public, passionate, and consistent. He had chosen loyalty over career, conviction over compromise, truth as he understood it over social acceptance. Whether those choices reflected wisdom or stubbornness, courage or delusion would be debated for years to come. What was undeniable was that Joe Torry had paid the ultimate price for refusing to abandon someone he believed was being unfairly persecuted. The laughter had stopped, but the man remained. In an industry built on calculated positioning and strategic retreats, Joe Torry had chosen authenticity over acceptance. The consequences had been devastating, but they had also revealed exactly who he was beneath the comedian's persona. That revelation had cost him everything he'd spent 30 years building. But it had also preserved something that no amount of success could provide: the ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.